There's a major new law coming online right here in the U.S., and it's going to mean a lot of compliance for small businesses. For some of you, it's going to be a mere annoyance. You're going to have to work through this, figure it out, maybe contact your attorney on a limited basis, and you can probably work through it. But for others of you, this thing may be a massive pain and real trouble, something you probably want to start working on now, even though the law is not coming into effect until January 1, 2024. We are talking about the new Corporate Transparency Act. This is a federal law here in the U.S., which is going to, in some ways, override or append to state law. So it's going to be a big shift and change in the way companies do and report things, particularly for companies that have a lot of owners or companies that have more complex ownership structures. The reality is, if you have a small business, you have yourself as the only owner, LLC corporation, your compliance is probably going to be fairly simple. You just got to know this law exists and make sure you file the appropriate reports within the deadlines. But for some of you that have a little more complex ownership structure, this thing can get really, really complicated really, really fast, and the burdens can be significant. So for some businesses out there, it's going to create a lot of work. And for some of you, this is going to be a real hassle. Now, a handful of my clients are already looking at that situation, right? They've got unusual ownership situations, sometimes because of litigation, sometimes because of just tense negotiations, and it's going to cause some potential reporting issues. We're already starting to work on that. But for others, it looks like it's going to be more of check the box. So let's jump into the Corporate Transparency Act, and let's help you understand it better. We'll get you a good guide here. A lot of this stuff is coming from the Small Business Compliance Guide, which is coming from FinCEN. That's where this information is going. The Financial Crime Enforcement Network, a Department of Treasury division. So this is the sister or brother organization to the IRS. They both sit underneath the Department of Treasury. This is going to the criminal folks. So that means, what are they doing with it? Well, this is reportedly to cut down on money laundering, crime, and other types of activities which might be going on with companies. The federal government is basically saying we need to know who owns everything out there so that we don't have these reporting issues, and that we can make sure that we know who's owning what and what's happening. So like many things, this is being brought in on the guise of lowering crime, but it's going to be a real reporting issue. A lot of people are concerned about security. What if the database gets hacked? What if some federal employee misuses this information? Also, it's worth mentioning there are massive penalties for not reporting. So you want to make sure that if you are subject to this law, and most small businesses will be, we'll talk a little bit about exemptions, most small businesses will be subject to this law, meaning that you're going to have to report, and if you don't report, you're potentially facing significant fines. Now, the reporting should be, again, for most entities, fairly simple. There's going to be a website or portal. You're going to go in, and you're going to log in, create an account, put in information about your company, and then you need to put in information about beneficial owners. These are generally 25% or greater owners, or people who have significant control. So we already see some gray starting to come in here and some issues to be developed, right? Who qualifies to be reported, who doesn't qualify to be reported, and how do we make a decision in or out? The other piece of this is that we're going to be tracing up the ownership structure. So for some of you, you're going to have owners that have in turn owners, and that will be a little simpler if everybody's in the U.S., but if we start getting trusts involved or international entities involved, we may have some real complications. And we may have the issue of, what about people who don't want to report? Because when you do report a beneficial owner, again, that 25% owner or somebody with that substantial control over the business, officers, presidents, other people, and potentially people with on board seats, veto rights. So a lot of different people might fall in that substantial control. They're either going to have to give you their FinCEN number, which means they're going to have to set up an account, provide certain information, and give you that number, or you're going to have to report certain information about them. That includes their home address and then also a picture or scan of things like a driver's license or a passport. So a lot of sensitive information that many businesses don't have. Most businesses I know of, and I've worked with a lot of them, don't keep a copy of their owners' driver's licenses or passports, right? That's the kind of thing you just never have kept. And in many cases, you may not even have the home address because a lot of investors use a business address for their beneficial ownership. You're also going to have to potentially keep up with changes of that address. So you're going to have to file. One of the questions might be occurring in your head is, when do I have to file this? Existing entities are going to get a transition period. So if you're existing prior to January 1, 2024, according to the rules, you're going to get a transition period. You're going to basically get a full year, all of 2024, to report. Now, I don't recommend waiting that entire period because you want to see if you have any of these issues, particularly if you're a little more complicated of a company. If you're a small, tiny company, you got one owner, 100%, you might want to wait later into 2024 till the portal gets cleaned up and any issues are worked out. But if you have a bigger company and you have complex ownership, you need to start tracing this data now. Now, for newly formed entities starting January 1, we are going to have to start reporting basically within 30 days of their formation. There may be a transition rule here, slipping this back to 90 days for 2024. That is under consideration, but it is not officially effective. So plan on a 30-day compliance period if you're getting ready to form a new entity in 2024. And so there's also a reporting period for any corrections. Basically, any U.S. Business is going to get caught up in the net of this. Now, there are 23 exemption categories, according to the FinCEN site. The issue is that those categories really apply to larger companies or nonprofits or other things that most small businesses aren't going to fall into. So unless you can go through those rules and really look at it and determine that you're exempt, consider yourself to be included, because that's where basically most people are going to be. And if you have trusts as owners, you may have to trace up into the beneficial ownership of that trust. So a lot of information going out, and then it's all going to go into this database. Now, there are some special considerations for some of you out there that may be important here to think about. So if you have maybe done business with people who have past criminal activity or records, you may want to start thinking about potentially changing that ownership structure here in 2023 so it doesn't get reported in 2024. We have at least heard anecdotes through other law offices of people who perhaps set up a business with a former criminal. Maybe the person's reformed. Maybe they have turned a new leaf, and somebody who is a business person with a great reputation decided to set up a business or a venture with somebody with a criminal record. Now, some of those people are starting to rethink that relationship because now they're going to be on a federal database and associated with that criminal person. Another thing to think about is as we move into next year, for the existing entities, this is not going to be as much of an issue. But for newly formed entities starting with that 2024 cycle that are reported after formation within 30 or 90 days, depending on how the rule hits, not only are you going to have to report the ownership information about the entity and who are the beneficial owners, who are the control persons, substantial control, but you also need to talk about who is the person who is the company applicant. That is the word they use. That's essentially the attorney, paralegal, other person who filled out the paperwork to form the entity. So a new consideration which this law is bringing into account is, what do we do if we have somebody who is forming a company? What if that attorney is doing some shady business as well? So now the reputation of your law firm and professionals that you're working with becomes even more important because you're going to be associated with them. And maybe you're completely on the up and up. You're doing everything right. That's certainly the types of people I work with. I know, our law firms, we strive to be very compliant and do things the right way. I certainly have seen other people who push the edge. And now if you're a client of a law firm that is potentially pushing the edge with some other people, maybe they've got some clients that aren't so good, maybe they got some people that are pushing the limits with taxes. If they become your company applicant, do you somehow get traced back through this reporting, right? So if one of their companies comes up dirty, somebody they help form, does FinCEN then search through the database and find you? Now, of course, if you've got a very clean database and a very clean record and you've done everything right, hopefully no issues. But you could see how you could get caught up into a real inconvenient situation here. So if you are a company and you are in the U.S., you need to start planning for this. You're going to probably have to file a report in 2024. That report may contain information that you don't typically give out or you don't typically have on file. So you're going to have to look at that. And as you go through updating your documents, you may want to think about putting compliance statements in there. Right, you're certainly going to need to get people's home addresses and information so that you can report it to the federal government. You potentially need to get people to update their information when they move so that you can update your reports to the federal government when those addresses change and as you bring new owners in. So this is going to require potentially some additional provisions in your operating documents, whether that's your LLC agreement or your corporate documents. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of questions about this Corporate Transparency Act. Your mind might already be swimming. You might be thinking about things. If you have things you can ask on a non-confidential basis, right? Don't put confidential information there, but very general questions. If you want to drop them below, it may inspire a future video or at least a segment of a future video. I'm glad to get your questions. I want to know what businesses are dealing with. So if you have general questions that are not confidential, put them below. Maybe have your friend ask it if you want to protect your confidentiality. But go ahead and drop the questions below. I'll be looking at them. Also, if you're a new subscriber, do let me know. If you're joining this channel and you want to keep updated, I do plan to do more videos on the Corporate Transparency Act, so do consider subscribing. If you want to get the client update that I sent out on the Corporate Transparency Act and potentially get on our newsletter, send me an email at hello@rsmlawplc. You can go ahead and email in there. Let me know you want the client update on the Corporate Transparency Act, or the other thing you can do is say, I want to get on your email list, or you can do both. Just put that in the body of the email. I'll be reviewing those and getting back with you. Thanks for tuning in today, folks. Look forward to seeing your comments. If you're a new subscriber, do say hello in those comments, and I look forward to joining you for another video soon.